Hello and welcome to this Bradford Educational Psychology Team short course on developing a relational approach to supporting children with disrupted attachments in school. My name is Geoff Morgan. I'm a specialist senior educational psychologist with Bradford Educational Psychology Team. So the aims of this short course are to provide a brief introduction to attachment theory, to describe what disrupted attachment might look like in the classroom for pupils, to introduce some ideas about how you can support children with disrupted attachments, and to provide information about the longer course provided by the Educational Psychology Team and available through Skills for Bradford. So the first bit we're going to talk about today is what are attachment and disrupted attachment. What does that mean? We're going to talk about key ideas in attachment. Just briefly summarise those. We go into a lot more detail about those in the longer course. We're going to talk about attachment in the classroom. We're going to describe and summarise a relational approach to supporting children with disrupted attachments, and we're going to talk about attachment-aware schools. Again, we're going to summarise these things. They are discussed in more detail in the longer course. So the first section is what is attachment? And very simply, attachment is a propensity to develop emotional bonds. And this propensity has evolved to maintain proximity between caregivers, parents, people that look after us, and their young to ensure their survival and health. So attachment can be observed in lots of species of animal. It is particularly important in children. It's particularly important in human beings because human beings are in a vulnerable state as in childhood for an extended period of time, much longer than other animals. So what do we mean when we say disrupted attachment? Disrupted attachment is a disruption in the emotional bonds between children and families, which impacts upon behaviour and relationships. It often occurs earlier in a child's life, but then has an impact on their later relationships and behaviour. What are the risk factors for disrupted attachment? Well, children are at risk of disrupted attachments if they have a history of adverse childhood experiences, including maltreatment, such as neglect, abuse, physical or emotional abuse. If they're looked after, if they've gone through the care system, they're likely to have had early adverse childhood experiences. If they have parental mental health needs or drug problems, in some cases physical health needs. If they've experienced domestic violence or violence in the home or community. If they've experienced bereavement or other forms of trauma. Or if they are adopted, quite often they will have early experiences of maltreatment or adverse childhood experiences. The key ideas in attachment that are discussed in a lot more detail in the longer course are attachment in neurodevelopment. We talk about how attachment affects the developing brain. We talk about early adversity and how that impacts social learning. And we talk about the working model, which is how our early experiences affect our beliefs about later relationships and our later relationships with people and our social interactions. We talk about containment, about emotional regulation, how containment is really important for emotional regulation. We talk about co-regulation, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail. We talk about security of attachment, insecure and secure attachment. What does secure attachment look like? What does insecure attachment look like? And we talk about behaviour messages or behaviour as communication. What does some of the behaviour we see communicate to us about what's going on below the surface with some of the children who have disrupted attachments in our school? So what does attachment in the classroom look like? In this section, we're going to talk about what does secure attachment look like in the classroom in children and young people. We're also going to talk about what we might see in the classroom that might indicate insecure attachment in children and young people. So secure attachment in the classroom, what we might see from a securely attached child or young person is that they can relate to both tasks and adults, that they are willing to take risks with their learning, they're willing to do things that they may find difficult, that they may find hard, that they can self-regulate, they can stay calm, focus and problem solve. environment, and that they can co-regulate, they can ask for help in an appropriate way. And what we often find with children with disrupted attachments is that they develop patterns of asking for help in a way that is maladaptive or unhelpful. So Heather Geddes' model of the learning triangle is one that I often use and I often find really helpful. The learning triangle for a securely attached child or young person is often that they're able to have an appropriate relationship with the teacher, and they're able to have a functional relationship with the task. An appropriate relationship with the teacher means they're able to ask for help, they're able to trust the teacher to set them challenges, and that they are able to interact appropriately with the teacher. So now we're going to go on to talk about behaviour which indicates insecure attachment. So we're thinking about seeking, avoiding, and disorganised behaviour. So there are three patterns of behaviour that I'll be looking for: seeking behaviours, avoiding behaviours, and disorganised behaviours. We're working on the basic principle that all behaviour has meaning. So you see the behaviour on the surface, that's like the tip of the iceberg, and underneath there's all this stuff going on. And the behaviour is telling us something about what's going on below the surface. What I should add is a note of caution that I'm going to describe these behaviours to you. Some of these behaviours are not necessarily always a sign of disrupted attachment. These behaviours may occur for other reasons. So just because we're seeing these behaviours doesn't mean that the child has disrupted attachment. So seeking behaviour, what am I talking about when I'm talking about seeking behaviour? So a child or young person may show the following. They may be easily frustrated. They may seek comfort but be unable to be comforted. They may be immature or helpless, or present as immature or helpless. They may seem oversensitive to criticism. They may be unfocused and unable to settle. They may test relationships. Boundary testing is a huge factor and a huge sort of feature of disrupted attachment. And they may show behaviour which is conventionally described as attention-seeking. I prefer the term attachment-seeking behaviour. In the longer training, we go into more detail using the learning triangle for insecure preoccupied attachment. So that's what's going on underneath. We're looking at a child who is preoccupied about relationships with adults, and that is interfering with their ability to settle and learn. The next set of behaviours that I want to talk about are avoiding behaviours. So the child or young person may show some of the following behaviours. They may appear to be independent of their teachers and seek to meet their needs on their own. Or they may have difficulty discussing feelings or showing weakness. They may be task-oriented, maybe self-reliant and high-achieving in some respects, for example, in maths or problem-solving, but they may like more closed-ended tasks and be more reluctant to participate in more open-ended tasks. They may be socially uncomfortable, exhibit indifference and avoid close relationships. They may seem rather superficial or manipulative in their relationships with others. They may find it difficult to seek help. They may not ask for help or put their hand up when they're stuck. And a common feature of avoiding behaviour is that they may be uncomfortable with praise or indifferent to praise. Children or young people may not accept praise or may be uncomfortable with praise. Okay, and in the long training, we talk in a lot more detail using Heather Geddes' learning triangle. So we talk about how the avoidance interferes with the relationship between the teacher and the pupil. The child is reluctant to trust adults, or reluctant to seek help from adults. That interferes with the relationship. So in the longer training, we talk about how we can use tasks to bridge the relationship between the teacher and the pupil. That you can't necessarily, with these pupils, easily kind of ask them how they're feeling or talk about their problems because they find it really difficult to seek help, to share their problems and concerns. The final bit of behaviour that we might see, and this is the sort of behaviour that tends to cause the most concern, and that is disorganised behaviour. The child may show the following. They may feel frightened or confused by teachers or experience them as frightening or frightened. They may often be highly vigilant, easily distracted, very emotionally reactive. They may present with bizarre, extreme, unpredictable, or distressing behaviour, which adults may find shocking or difficult to manage. And they may often present as sensitive to criticism, defiant and or controlling, and easily overwhelmed. So with the learning triangle, in disorganised attachment, which is the sort of underlying process that we see around this disorganised behaviour, we may be seeing around this disorganised behaviour, is the child or young person is experiencing so much anxiety they cannot form an effective relationship with the teacher or with the task, and the strategies we need to put in place should be about reducing that anxiety through using structure, through using predictability, through helping them to manage difficult emotions. And we talk about that in a lot more detail during the long course. So next, I'm going to talk about what do we mean by a relational approach. A relational approach describes teaching and education that supports children to settle and learn through providing emotional security in their learning environment. So a relational approach is about thinking about the emotional needs of the child to enable them to settle and learn. I'm going to talk about two things today, just briefly. I'm going to talk about emotion coaching. So emotion coaching is a style of interaction that we use that is summarized in the following phrase: connect before correct. So the idea is that we're recognizing, empathizing, validating, and labeling feelings, even if the expression of those feelings are expressed in a way that we find difficult or hard to accept. We set limits on behavior. If needed, we say, I can see you're upset. I can see these things are bothering you. We talk about the importance of boundaries and setting limits on behavior. And then we also think a lot about problem solving. So we think about behavior as an opportunity to problem solve. So behavior communicates that the child has a learning need there and needs to learn to problem solve, to manage emotions, to regulate emotions, to ask for help. The other principle we talk about in relational approach is PACE, which is by Dan Hughes. Dan Hughes is a very respected and experienced clinical psychologist who is an expert in the field of attachment, supporting children who are adopted or fostered. Dan Hughes talks about PACE: playfulness, acceptance, and curiosity and empathy. And we talk about this in a lot more detail in the long course. What does playfulness look like? How do we interact in a playful way with children who are showing attachment needs? How do we show acceptance? How do we show curiosity about behavior? How do we show empathy for those children, even though those children are showing behavior that we may find difficult or hard to accept? The next bit I'm going to talk about is attachment-aware schools. So attachment-aware schools and attachment-aware policies, attachment-aware behaviour and relationships policy. They are attachment-aware in the way that they structure their environment and how their culture is the staff support. And I cannot underestimate. You cannot underestimate the value of staff support within an attachment-aware school. Staff support is crucial. Staff who feel supported will be more supportive to children. We also talk about staff support and training, and we also talk about leadership. Sorry, I got rather distracted by that little window that just popped up there. So we talk about leadership and how leadership is really important in attachment-aware schools. Okay, if you want to book onto the longer course, and I would encourage you to book onto the longer course, please go to Skills for Bradford. That was the portal that you used to book this course. And just quickly, I'll talk about some further reading. The books by Louise Bombert, Inside I'm Hurting, What About Me, for example, a very good introduction to thinking about attachment in the classroom. The book by Louise Bombert and Daniel Hughes, Settling to Learn, which is available through Worth Publishing, is a very good introduction to the ideas around PACE and helping children to settle to learn and focus in the classroom. If you want some free resources, the Brighton and Hove City Council have their attachment-aware behaviour policy available online. The link is there on the slide. You can also just Google Brighton and Hove City Council attachment-aware behaviour policy, and those resources are available online. A book I really like is Attachment in the Classroom by Heather Geddes, and I use Heather Geddes' learning triangle model a lot to think about how we can support children with disrupted attachments. I really would recommend that book. And then for those who are working with young people in secondary settings or post-16 environments, the book Teenagers and Attachment by Andrea Perry, or edited by Andrea Perry, which contains lots of different articles by experts in the field around helping adolescents with disrupted attachments. Thank you very much for signing up for this short course. Hopefully I'll see you in the longer course, which will take place soon. Thank you for watching.